consider buying your processed oboe and bassoon cane from those friendly folks over at Barton Cane. Processed with care and precision for your everyday reed-making needs. Take the pain and injury out of reed-making by letting Barton Cane do the hard, repetitive, boring stuff. Free up time for practicing, happy hours, hikes, baking, and spending time with friends and family. Barton Cane, here for you. Visit www.bartoncane.com.
Chemical City Double Reeds is a full-service double reed shop specializing in the sale of instruments, cane, accessories, and sheet music. Double Reed Dish listeners can enjoy free shipping with code DRDISH, all caps, no spaces. Visit them in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or online at chemicalcityreeds.com.
Hi, I'm Galit Kaunitz.
And I'm Jackie Wilson, and you're listening to Double Reed Dish,
A podcast for oboists,
bassoonists,
and the people who love them. Second to last one.
The last bassoon episode. So the bassoons who don't listen to the oboe episodes, this is their last.
We're not going to get sappy on this one. Just warning you.
No.
Also, my dogs are in here, so if you can hear them a little bit in the background, enjoy their happy dogness.
Yeah, they're fine. I can't see them. I can just see their wagging tails like emerging from the bottom of the frame. It's pretty cute. But for today, we had planned a mailbag episode, and we want to get to all the questions that were submitted. So I think we should just dig in or dive in or whatever. What if we start with favorite interview for both oboe and bassoon? And was there anyone you were starstruck to connect with?
Probably my most starstruck was Jonathan Kelly.
Yeah.
I was probably at my most starstruck.
Yeah. Similarly, Sophie Dervaux was mine.
Uh-huh.
And I remember that's not the longest interview. And feeling like you can ask her anything, like, Jackie, come on. And I was just like, like having a really hard time, like coming up with questions. I remember waiting for her to log on. I was really nervous.
I remember being like extra bubbly and giggly for Jonathan Kelly's interview.
I think the first like year or 6 months, we were probably a little nervous for everybody.
We were a wreck.
But then once we found our rhythm,
yeah,
I think Sophie was my big, like, ooh, God.
Yeah. And, they were both absolutely lovely.
They were, yes. But what about favorite for both oboe and bassoon?
So my absolute favorite oboe episode was Mark Debsky, who's principal in the Florida Orchestra. Mm-hmm. He was just so vulnerable. Mm-hmm. And so real and so cool. It was, the level of vulnerability, I think, was unprecedented on the podcast.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he was for sure my oboe favorite. What about you for bassoon?
My bassoon favorite, I think it's probably a tie between, I'm surprised I didn't say I wasn't nervous to interview David McGill, but he's someone who I've admired for a long time and really admire his book and the things that he communicates in his book. And so he, a little peek behind the curtain, has been someone we've asked since month one. And so to finally get him was like, oh yeah. But my other, and I know I've talked about it before, is the Ben Kamens interview where he was likewise very vulnerable and talked about, the expectations of what we want to accomplish. And sometimes those happen and sometimes they don't. And you have to really make the most with where you are now. And that interview came at a time where I just really needed to hear that. I was not happy where I was professionally. I was getting close, but not getting offers. And so to hear someone who's, so respected in our community say that he not only has struggled, but sometimes continues to struggle with the same thing and perception of self. It was just kind of like that moment of like exactly what I needed to hear at the moment I could hear it and accept
Mhm.
it. And so that remains like a really special moment. What about bassoon for you? Miles made us laugh a lot.
Oh my God, that was so funny. We're so lucky, like there's been so many.
I know.
I was just thinking, actually, this is not bassoon, and this is not fair to all the amazing bassoon interviews that we've done. But I was just thinking back while you were talking to the Diana Doherty interview.
Yes.
And I remember, first of all, our longtime listeners know the drama of that.
Time zone
The time zone snafu.
inversion drama.
I don't think Diana knows about the time zone problem, but she was probably like, why are these girls so spazzy? Why are they out of breath? But no, I just remember her talking about how she has never like been in love with her own sound and had to work on her sound so much.
Hmm.
And I remember thinking, I can't think of anything more perfect than your sound.
Yeah.
And like that was a big aha moment for me. It's like your perception
Yeah.
is completely removed from other people's perception. Like
Yeah.
I couldn't hold her sound at a higher level. And
Yeah.
like consistent every time I hear her, it's always the most amazing sound.
Yeah. I think that's a big through line of these people that we've spoken to, especially at levels where we assume one, you're perfect, and two, you are perfect and you think of yourself as perfect. And it's just
Mhm.
like one thing I've learned over the last 8 years is that is not even true.
Oh, okay. Now, okay. Some of the standout bassoon episodes for me have been Nancy Goris
Oh, yes.
and Ula Christendahl.
Hmm.
Do you remember how much time he gave us after the interview?
Yeah, that's actually a lot of people. I guess something our listeners wouldn't know is a lot of our guests want to hang out after the
Yeah.
interview. Diana hung out after the
Uh-huh.
interview was done. I remember Whitney Crockett we interviewed at kind of the height
Hmm.
of COVID, and he was like, "Can we keep talking, please?"
I'm so bored.
And he showed us like this stockpile of blanks he had made. He's like, "I can't make any more blanks. I don't need 500 blanks." Uh, but I do want to make sure to shout out, I think, two oboe interviews that really come to mind as having been very impressionable was first Alan Vogel.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And you and I quote that
All the time.
you're entitled to the work, but you're not entitled to the fruits of the work
Yeah, that's from the Bhagavad Gita, I think you
all the
mentioned.
time. Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was him. So, uh, and then Peter Cooper and him
Yes.
talking about there's no such
I
thing as a mock
reference Peter's
audition.
interview all the time. Sorry. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt you. Yeah.
No, yeah, no, same. It was so helpful, just that idea of there's no such thing as a mock audition. A performance is a performance. And if you think of it that way, you can walk on stage going, oh, this is just the eighth time I've played it or whatever. And it was actually special because that was fundamental to my preparation to play at IDRS this summer. But
Mhm.
even though on the concert, Peter didn't play right before me, the rehearsal schedule was always Peter right before me. And so I was sitting there watching him play from backstage, just kind of thinking about like, oh, you were so helpful to me in this regard and everything. So
And his thing about the inner freakout meter was really impactful for me too.
yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
Okay. Next question. We're gonna go from least sentimental and sappy to most. So what is a pinch me moment in your careers thus far? And I kind of feel like we should come at this from a podcast angle.
Oh yeah. So mine was our first live show at Miami University Bassoon Day. When
Yes,
was this? Like 2017, 2018?
sounds about right.
And we were backstage holding each other like, I can't believe we're doing this.
We're doing a live show.
For me, that was still like the most pinch me moment. Like, whoa!
I think mine, with the exception of like anytime someone like quotes the podcast back to us or like the it's time to end this nerd parade and like people that's something people reference, I'm always like, oh my God, people listen. Um but I think would be the live show at Colorado Boulder
Uh-huh.
IDRS,
Uh-huh.
where it was like standing room only. The room they put us in was way too small, and there are so many people, and we were just all like laughing and having so much fun.
Wait, was that Nailed It? Or was
Yes, that was
that was
Nailed
Nailed It?
It.
Okay.
And I can't remember if it was the same day or the next day, but then we had our recital of the consortium
That's
pieces,
right.
and we
Mhm.
got to frame the consortium pieces in our like approach to the podcast and our friendship and that
Yeah,
type of
that was
stuff.
really cool.
And there were a lot of people joining us for that, so that was a really special measurable impact of the podcast or whatnot.
Yeah.
Y'all. Okay. This is adorable. Someone turned it on us. What advice do you have for someone who aspires to have a career like y'all's?
Collaborate, don't compete.
Yes.
Collaborate, make friends. Do things with your friends.
Yep.
Don't look at this field like it's scarcity,
Yeah.
Like make things happen that you want to see happen and do it with your friends.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't have said it better. Look at every single person with the eyes of like, what can I learn from them?
Yeah. Love goggles. You taught me that. Love goggles.
Yes, wear your love goggles. And also, my advice is when a good thought about someone else comes to your mind, give
Yeah.
compliments freely and easily. You never know what your kind words will like mean to somebody. There are compliments I've received that I'll carry with me through the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And you could be that for someone else. If you notice someone doing or sounding or playing awesome or even not musical, wow, it's a great color on you.
Mm-hmm.
Just like say it, I think. I don't know if that's really career advice, but I think it works.
I like it.
Okay. What are your dreams for the double read community in the future?
I want there to be a focus on community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want, like, I want us to lift each other up. I don't want us to see each other as competition. Like, I want us to do things that mean something. And the
Mm-hmm.
only way to do that is by working together. This is an extension of my last answer, I guess. But
I think this and also the last question are all going to be related to,
yeah,
the type of thing
yeah.
what you're talking about.
I want us to be a community of teachers
Mm-hmm. And learners.
and learners and community members. I don't want it to be like a competitive, oh, so and so didn't deserve that opportunity and da da da
Yeah.
da da. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I just want us to be working toward making our little corner better.
Yeah. Related, and I don't know how this is going to happen perfectly or really, but it's a dream, so I don't have to have a solution. But my dream would be that we figure out a way for playing and making reads for and teaching and learning these instruments to not be so cost prohibitive
Yeah.
and that they are widely accessible and that only certain people don't that not only certain people get to experience them. And I think there are a lot of people thinking about this issue, and it's such a hard one to tackle, but I think it is key and imperative to all the stuff you mentioned of
Hmm.
just how do we make room and create opportunities for everyone who wants to learn and pursue these instruments.
Hmm. Yeah. It's imperative to our own survival.
Hmm. All right. The last question in our mailbag. How would you like your podcast to be remembered? I thought we weren't going to get sentimental on this episode, and I find myself getting, I can even hear our voices getting a little
A
more
little
contemplative.
wistful. I want us to be remembered as humanizing the people in our community.
Yeah.
And bringing access to, taking these, like, because I've learned so much.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm a completely different performer and teacher. I'm really shocked you can't hear this.
I can hear that last one a little bit. I can hear
Anyway, I'm a completely different performer and teacher from talking to all of the people that we have talked to.
Yes.
And I am proud of the fact that we have put that collective bit of knowledge out there, and have shared all those perspectives. So I hope the podcast will be remembered as, a great archive of information, and something that has kind of lightened up the double reed community a little bit, and humanized all of our, friends and peers who are out there doing this work with us. How about you?
Beautifully said. I think I'd just go back to your answer to the previous question of they espoused and created visibility for a way to exist in classical music and double reed playing that was not competitive, that was collaborative, that was collegial. They tried to bring people together. They tried to foster the type of community. Like, I guess, yeah, to put it in a nutshell, they attempted to create that which they wanted to see in the field.
And it's all truly, sorry, I keep interrupting you today. I'm so sorry.
No, you're good.
It's all like taken from the reality of our friendship together.
Yeah.
It's like we took our relationship together and we tried to kind of put that out there.
Yeah. I guess how do I want to be remembered? Friends.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, they were the best of friends, and they, through their friendship, created some awesome collaborations, projects, pieces of music, and opportunities for people to learn. But they did that through the power of being friends.
We started friends and now we're family.
Yeah, for sure.
So by like leaning into the friendship, it's only strengthened it. So if you're out there and you are like, oh, I want to do something with my best friend, do it.
Yes. And we get into that in the very last interview. But no, I completely agree. Like, what I hope to see, maybe that's another to the last question. What I hope to see in the double reed community is like, what is the next double reed dish? And maybe it is a podcast, or maybe it's like a TikTok channel or something that hasn't even been invented yet, or a book or a method or something. But maybe us just having an idea and then saying, well, let's create it, and would inspire our colleagues and the next generation of double reed players coming up to do the same. And I don't think it'll look like double reed dish looked, but if we inspired someone to, pursue a project or create something, that would make me really proud of this legacy.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
I know. I feel like we need to like tell some dumb joke or something so we don't end on like a la la la.
It always makes me laugh when you make that sound, though. La, la, la.
Specializing in the finest assortment of oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and their accessories, RDG Woodwinds serves musicians from around the world. Their employees are all professional musicians who have a deep knowledge of the products they sell. RDG's repair shop has an international reputation with a combined 100 plus years of experience among the 5 repair technicians. Plain and simple, RDG provides excellent products and fabulous customer service. Visit them at rdgwoodwinds.com. They look forward to working with you.
AC/DC Reeds is a one-woman bassoon reed workshop in Minnesota run by Dr. Ariel Detweiler, producing over 1,500 reeds per year. Selling beginner bassoon reeds, advanced bassoon reeds, and contrabassoon reeds, AC/DC Reeds are hailed by customers for their even intonation, ease of response in all registers, warm tone quality, and strong low register. Every reed is made from tube cane processed in-house to Ariel's specifications using Rigati or Lavaro cane and a Rieger 1A shape. You'll also find bassoon-themed gifts in the shop, including greeting cards, stickers, artistic prints, and the ever-popular Black Wing bassoon pencil. Make sure to follow AC/DC Reeds on Instagram, where Ariel posts artistic photos and educational stories about her everyday experiences with reed making. AC/DC Reads is a proud sponsor of Double Reed Dish, sharing positive and uplifting interviews to inspire and connect the bassoon community around the world. Find AC/DC Reads at www.acdcreads.com or at retailers like Chemical City Double Reeds, Midwest Musical Imports, or Reed Supplies Canada. Try out AC/DC Reads today and let the reed do the work.
We are so happy to welcome to the podcast Bob Williams, retired principal bassoon of the Detroit Symphony. Welcome, Bob.
It's a pleasure to be here.
We love to start by asking our guests how they started playing their instruments. So, can you tell us how the bassoon came into your life?
Sure. I first saw the bassoon, I think, when a wind quintet went to my elementary school. And then I was in a junior high school or middle school, which is actually about 3 miles from where we're talking right now. And in 8th grade, I was a second chair clarinet player, and my best friend was a principal clarinet player. The first chair. This is in our junior high school band, and I knew I'd never be first chair, and nobody played the bassoon, and the band director was an oboe player. And he said, well, we've got this bassoon back here. Does anybody want to play it? And I stuck up my hand. I said, hey, I can be first chair. So I grabbed the bassoon, and it took me a while to, he tried to show me how to put it together, and I took it home, and had forgot how to put it together. Then I tried to put it together again, and I don't even know what we did for reeds, but my mom was a piano teacher and a church organist, so I was taking clarinet lessons at the time. I was not a bad clarinet player, but I was not a great clarinet player. And anyway, so she managed to find a bassoon teacher that was a student at the University of Arizona. I'm in Tucson now, and so I started. I don't know if he gave me reeds or I bought Jones reeds, because at the time Wendell Jones was living in Tucson. And so in 8th grade, I started playing, and I played in the little middle school orchestra, before I even hardly knew how to play the instrument. But I started taking a bus a couple miles to the middle school where the thing met on Saturdays. And I remember, playing with a bunch of people and playing in an orchestra starting in 8th grade. And high school, I was a pretty mediocre bassoonist my freshman year, and I kept studying. And then my junior year, I got a chance to study with Wendell Jones, you guys remember Jones double reeds? Well, Wendell Jones was Jones double reeds, and he was a bassoon professor here at the University of Arizona. He was the principal bassoon in the Tucson Symphony. And, he had the reed business. So all of a sudden I had a source of reeds and a source of cane. So, I mean, that was it's been an inspiration. I mean, he was my inspiration for starting my little company where we process cane to make into reeds. Anyway, and I studied with him 2 years. And then, of course, I was going to study with him here at the university, but he left. He went to Spokane and started teaching at Eastern Washington State College in Cheney, Washington. So I lost my great teacher, but in many ways that was kind of it helped me out a lot because so my freshman year at the I got a scholarship for the University of Arizona, and I was playing like assistant principal in contra in the Tucson Symphony, and I was the second chair bassoonist in the University Orchestra, and the first chair was Chuck Olery. I don't know if you guys talked to Chuck Olery at all. He started off in the San Francisco Symphony, ended up playing principal in the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra for many years. He's been a really good friend of mine for many years. Anyway, in the middle of my freshman year, Chuck got kicked out of the orchestra for doing a Tucson Symphony gig so he missed a recording session that the University Orchestra was doing, and I ended up having to play on that. And believe me, I was not a very good player, but the 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 orchestra director kicked him out, so I ended up as the principal bassoon in my university orchestra my freshman year, and then if you look at that, my wife, Reba Womble, who played English horn in the Detroit Symphony and Dallas Symphony for many years, she went to Eastman, and she never even played in an orchestra in Eastman until her junior year. And then after her junior year, she auditioned and got the second oboe job in the Dallas Symphony. But so my freshman year, I was playing contrabassoon in the Tucson Symphony, and then I was playing. I got moved up to principal, and I think we were doing Brahms symphonies and Tchaikovsky symphonies, and that kind of put me on the spot, so I had to practice. And at the end of my freshman year, I decided, well, I should really study with a really good bassoonist if I could find one. So I went around and I heard the recording of the Mozart concerto with Leonard Sherrow, and discovered that Leonard Sherrow was teaching at Aspen. So I went to Aspen after my freshman year, which was in 1968, and studied with Leonard Sherrow and came back to the university. And so at the beginning of my sophomore year, Chuck had left Tucson. He was getting a PhD in physics and math at UCLA. And the guy that was the TA the my freshman year, his name was Gordon Soley, and he was teaching at Portland State, and he was flying back to play principal in the Tucson Symphony. So this is the beginning of my sophomore year. They had brought in a girl to teach, another TA to teach bassoon, and I think within about 2 weeks of her coming here, she got some kind of disease and she couldn't play, had to go back home. So they had no bassoonist in the for the university for the university wind quintet, the faculty quintet. So since I was the only bassoonist they could find within about 100 miles, they drafted me into the faculty quintet. Then halfway through my sophomore year, Gordon Soley came down with something. He got a sinus infection and they had to pull all of his, not all of it, but a lot of his upper teeth, so he couldn't play. So all of a sudden I got drafted in the middle of my sophomore year to play principal in the Tucson Symphony. So I was playing in the faculty quintet. All of a sudden I got drafted to play principal in the Tucson Symphony and plus the university orchestra. So I got a lot of playing, and I was playing in, I think the university had a couple of orchestras going on besides their main orchestra. And so anyway, you can see I did quite a lot of playing. Then I think at the end of my sophomore year, I decided to sell encyclopedias during the summer. So I think I managed to sell one thing of encyclopedias and trying to study with a bassoonist up in Phoenix and managed to take a couple lessons with him, but I didn't really get a lot of progress. But starting my junior year, I guess they didn't decided that I wasn't too bad of a player, so I kept the job as the principal bassoon of the Tucson Symphony. And I kept that for the next 2 years until I left to study with Norman Hertzberg at USC. And after my junior year and senior year, I studied with Norman Hertzberg at the Music Academy of the West. And, he was an inspiration. He was a fantastic teacher. I went to USC for 1 year of grad school, and it's funny, Ben Kamens and I were both there at the same time. Ben was a sophomore, and I was a first year grad student, and we both uh, we both got jobs after that first year. Ben got the assistant principal job in Minnesota, and I got the principal job in the Winnipeg Symphony. But there's a kind of a funny story. I was talking about Chuck Olery. Well, Chuck um, was working at UCLA, and this was during Vietnam, and he was going to get drafted. So he enlisted into the band at the Presidio in San Francisco. It was an army band in San Francisco. So he was playing in that orchestra. I remember, so my senior year, there was an assistant principal and second opening in San Francisco Symphony. And I went to stay with Chuck, and we both took the auditions, and Chuck won the job as the assistant principal in San Francisco. I didn't do too well. I didn't make it to the finals or anything like that. Then a year later, when I was at USC, I think it was in January, the Ozawa, who was the conductor at San Francisco, decided to move the principal down to the assistant principal and make a principal opening. And so I went to that audition, and I stayed with Chuck. And the first day, there were two finalists, and it was Chuck and me. We were the two finalists from the first day of the audition. And then the next day, he brought in Ryoi Nakagawa. That was Ozawa brought him in, and Nakagawa won the job. So neither Chuck and I won the job, but it was kind of funny because I was staying with Chuck, and we were, the first day we were both practicing for the preliminary, and then when we both made the finals, I had to find another place to practice. It was we were both. So anyway, so after my freshman year I'm not my first year of grad school at USC, I took the audition for the Winnipeg Symphony and won that audition. So I played up in Winnipeg for 2 years, and Winnipeg was an interesting job because there's nothing around Winnipeg. So Winnipeg's a very cultured city. They have a ballet, they have a opera, they have the symphony. So you're playing all kinds of music there. And they also had at the time they had a CBC orchestra. So the CBC was a recording orchestra. So every Monday we would record something. They'd give you the music a few days ahead of time. You'd practice, and so it was a very I enjoyed the Winnipeg Symphony, but it was really, really cold. You can imagine somebody growing up in Tucson and going to Winnipeg, and one day I remember I was looking outside, and it had snowed, and the next day that all the trees had lost their leaves. It was such a different experience. So another interesting thing about the Winnipeg Symphony is that I showed up, and the principal clarinet player, his name was Ted Owen, and he had gone to the same high school in Tucson as I had attended only 5 years ahead of me. And I managed to, so I was in Winnipeg for 2 years, took the audition for the Detroit Symphony in 1974. And I remember flying from Winnipeg to Windsor, Ontario, then taking a taxi from Windsor across the border to Detroit to try to figure out where Ford Auditorium was, where they had the audition, and taking the audition, and then they had me, they had auditions over 2 weeks, so I was the finalist from the first week. So I had to go back the next week for the next set of finals, and it turned out I came in second on that audition. Will Roberts of the Dallas Symphony came in first, but Will was the personnel manager in Dallas, and he had gone to school with both our principal flute and our principal oboe player at Oberlin. But because he was personnel manager, they couldn't pay him enough for Detroit. So then they offered me the job, and I gladly took it and spent the next 46 years in Detroit. So, and I love the orchestra. I mean, I love Detroit. Everybody puts Detroit down, but the orchestra was a fantastic orchestra. We went through quite a lot of very good conductors, some conductors that weren't fantastic, but but any orchestra situation is good. I was very lucky to play pretty much with the same principal winds for almost 40 years. So
Wow.
everybody started retiring a little bit before me because most of them were a little bit older than me. And now I look at the orchestra and they still do these webcasts and I can take a look and see all my buddies almost every other week when they do a webcast in Detroit. So, so how was that? Was that okay?
Yes, and we want to delve more into your career in Detroit. But before we get into that, Norman Hertzberg is such a seminal figure in bassoon pedagogy. And unfortunately, we will never be able to interview him. Can we hear a bit about what he was like, what lessons were like, what you learned, why, in your opinion, he has been so influential in his legacy? Can you tell us about him a little bit?
I think Mr. Hertzberg was he was at the time I started studying with him, which was probably in 1970, I think was one of the first year I went to the music academy. Um, he was the son-in-law of Simon Kovar, and he had studied with Simon Kovar in New York along with Leonard Sharrow, and Simon Kovar was kind of the big uh, teacher of that generation, Kovar and Manny Ziegler and a lot of these bassoonists. And then so Hertzberg was his son-in-law. And I think Hertzberg went to LA, he basically was principal bassoon of the St. Louis Symphony, and he decided he didn't really like that job so much, so he decided, well, I'm going to go to LA and freelance. And he just moved up and he was handy enough. I think he built part of his house and he managed to get into the freelancing thing. And, he ended up doing quite a lot of the bassoon solos, famous, I can't name all of the shows that he was a bassoon player on, but he was a very, very successful freelancer in LA. And I think, he studied with Kovar and he was smart enough to realize that there were other things that he needed to learn. Like there was the story that he told that he got a new Heckel bassoon and he was playing on it and all of a sudden a lot of the notes weren't coming out. They were cracking. And he said, okay, you know, what do I do? And he thought, oh, this bassoon's it's a terrible bassoon. So he took it over to the principal bassoon, Fritz Moritz, who was the principal bassoon of the LA Philharmonic. And Moritz was German trained. Moritz was a good German bassoon. So Moritz tried the bassoon out and he said, hey, this is a great bassoon. It works pretty perfectly well. And I think that was the first time that Hertzberg actually realized about flicking. So,
Mm,
Hertzberg's idea of teaching is that, every note should be clean. The tacks should not have any of the nasty stuff that we get when we're not using our speaker keys and things like that.
mhm,
So he had a way he kept approaching the bassoon from kind of a way that this is how it should be played, and this is what you needed to do to play it. So he had these scale etudes. I remember the first summer I was at the music academy. So you can look at me. I told you I was in my sophomore year. I was in the faculty quintet. Then I got principal in the Tucson Symphony. So I had this poor teacher that came in my junior year, and she was trying to teach me all this stuff, but I thought, oh, I know how to play the bassoon, and
mm,
she was telling me how to do all these things, and I just kind of ignored her. I was playing Vivaldi concertos, and I don't, I played concertos with the orchestra. I played the Mozart, Vivaldi my junior year. I think the Mozart my senior year. Anyway, I went to Hertzberg and I started playing, and he said, "No, this is, you can't sound like this." So you go to the practice room and you start playing as a C major scale, starting on the lowest note of the horn, which is on a B, and you start, with all these different articulations, and you use your thumb keys, and and at the time, it was, it was not only getting clean attacks, but it was learning how to go from one note to another note cleanly, using the flick keys or using the proper half hole or using the proper fingerings or whatever it was. Anyway, he got us to play much more cleanly than I think a lot of people had been taught. Can I tell you a story of
Please.
so Van Hosen was a bassoon teacher at Eastman, right?
Hmm.
So Hertzberg used to always say that he would teach all of the Van Hosen's students how to play the bassoon. Now I know in Detroit we had our contrabassoon player, Marcus Schoen, very fine player. He went to USC, studied with Hertzberg, then he went to Eastman and studied with Van Hosen. So I don't want to, but I had the only experience I ever had with Van Hosen was when he was doing a master class at Michigan State, and Barry Stees had just been hired, and Barry Stees was, of course, a Van Hosen student, and there was a kid that was playing an etude, and I think it was one of the Melody concert studies, but it involved an awful lot of articulated notes.
Hmm.
And it was just cracking all over the place on the notes. The articulation wasn't coming out. It was not clean. And Van Hosen was telling the kid, well, you need to turn your head at a 20-degree angle and tongue on the corner of the reed, and maybe that'll help. And the kid was trying to do all these things. Nothing helped. Nothing helped. And I was sitting here. I was sitting here next to Richard Bean. So Richard Bean, at the time was studying at Michigan, and Richard was trying to say, "Calm down, Bob. Calm down, Bob." And I finally stuck up my hand. I said, all he has to do is open the C key, and that note will come out clean. And Van Hosen said, "No, we don't do that."
Oh.
And okay, so I thought that was just mind-boggling for me. So
Hmm.
about 2 years later, Bill Waterhouse is doing a master class at Michigan State. Barry's there again. Kid's playing one of the Weissenborn, I think it's one of the scale studies, but and he's cracking all the notes. And then Waterhouse goes to the kid and he says, "Do you know, young man, do you know what your left thumb is for when you play the bassoon?" And I thought, oh my God, thank God. Because that was, Hertzberg, we had to play, you had to use the speaker keys. And uh I think that was a huge difference. That's plus he had, the scale studies, the long tone exercises, just trying to get clean attacks and things like that.
Hmm.
Uh and then, of course, the reeds. Now, when I studied with Hertzberg, he wasn't quite into the beveling part yet. He wasn't teaching beveling, and he came across. He did this reed test that he gave to all of his kids, probably about 5 or 6 years after I left, and he was trying to figure out, okay, how should a reed function? We always get reeds, and okay, you scrape a little here, you scrape a little here. Why do you do that? And he was, his approach to reed making was very, very clear. And so if you want to play like the Rite of Spring, what kind of reed do you need? You need a reed that plays the upper register a little bit better. So maybe you should narrow it a little bit, or maybe chop it a little closer.
Sounds like an oboe reed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like an oboe reed. But and it was funny. I went from Detroit. When I went to Detroit, I went over and I met Hugh Cooper, who was teaching at Michigan, and Cooper was the second bassoonist in the Detroit Symphony. And at the time I was there, I was I had this thing on my head. I was the principal again. So principals always know more than anybody else. But, Cooper was a fantastic teacher and he knew so much about the bassoon and he knew an awful lot about reeds. And his approach, it was funny. Cooper's approach to reeds, you could look at his little thesis that he wrote out. I don't know if they're available. I think some of them are back in the double reed journals, but they make a hell of a lot of sense too. I mean, he's saying basically the same thing that Hertzberg said in a different way, and they both make so much sense that you know, reed making is a science. It's not magic. If you get a reed to work a certain way, you can get it. I don't. I'm not making. I'm kind of doing gibberish, but I mean, there's certain things you do to reeds to get them to play one way or another. And Hertzberg was really into that, especially towards the end of his teaching career. He was having. He sent me one of his reed exams, and I tried to take it, and then I would send it to him, and he'd like most of my answers, and then he would write me back and say, "Well, this is a little different," or but he was really into the bevel effect of reeds, using beveling and stuff like that to change the quality of reeds, which I still think is a little bit of hocus pocus, but I think I bevel all my reeds. I still bevel all my reeds, but I really don't know if it really makes them play any better. I don't know.
That's awesome. And you've alluded already a couple times to, over the course of your career, your perception of what being principal bassoon means changed. And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
wonder if
I mean,
you could talk to us a bit about what it means to you to be a great principal bassoon and how, over the course of your long tenure with the Detroit Symphony, did that change and what did you learn over time?
oh, I just think I had to realize that my ego got in my way in many ways. I I joined the orchestra, and the second bassoonist in the orchestra was Phil Austin, who's this fantastic bassoon player. And once again, he's one of my best friends. But he only stayed in Detroit for about 5 years, and then he got the second bassoon job in the Cleveland Orchestra. And Phil was fantastic. He's a fantastic second bassoonist. And Phil and I got along really well because we would get in fights, and then it would be all over. I mean, the next day, everything would be fine. And Phil wasn't scared to tell me off. Phil was, he was that's one thing that I love about Phil. And I think so. Then about, oh, maybe after he left, we had a couple of other second bassoons, but then we hired Victoria King, and Victoria had studied with me a little bit, but I think she was a little scared of me, and I was a little bit of a asshole, I think, at the beginning, and over it took about 4 or 5 years before I finally realized that there was kind of a little bit of a second strike. All the second winds kind of got together and the second winds really work much harder than most of the other winds in the orchestra. And they finally got together and finally tried to get a little bit of relief. And it took us a while, and then we tried to work things out, and then we worked things out, and it was really, really fun. But there was a time when, especially when she thought I was a total asshole, and she wasn't speaking to me. We're playing in the orchestra, and we're still playing together. We're trying to get along, but we had just come across the Rigger tip profiler, which is a machine that basically saves most bassoonists. Once they get one, they realize, how can I not have had one of these machines over the last 10 years? So I had a tip profiler, and before we stopped talking to each other, I would lend her my tip profiler, and she'd take it home, do some reads, and bring it back. So for about 6 months, we weren't talking, but every month she would turn to me and say, "Can I borrow your tip profiler?" And I'd bring it home, and she'd take it home, and then she'd give it back. Then we wouldn't talk to each other for a while. But that kind of got over when I kind of got off my high horse, and we realized to try to help out the winds. I think Phil in Cleveland worked his ass off for almost his entire career, because that orchestra was very, very, I don't know, straight laced. And second bassoon, the seconds all played all the time. They never got any relief. And finally, we got in our contracts. Usually, when they brought in, like, the contra players would say contra bassoon and bassoon. So the contra player would play second. Sometimes the contra player would play first, or whatever they wanted to play. So that helps. It just makes life a lot better if everybody gets a little bit of time off, and you don't have one person that is the holier than holy or anything like that in the orchestra.
Mhm.
But it was nice playing with the same people all the time, and the same oboe, the same clarinet player, the same flute player, because you knew where their pitch tendencies would be, and that went along. That went well for quite a while. I loved playing with. I mean, Irv Monroe was our principal flute. Don Baker was our principal oboe, and I had two really, really great clarinet players. The first one was Paul Schaller, who was there when I got the job, and then Ted Owen, who came over from Winnipeg, who was a person that actually grew up in Tucson. We were all playing together in Detroit. Plus,
English horn player wasn't bad either, probably.
English horn player was fantastic. I always tell Treva. I mean, Treva. I told her she could make more music on a long tone than I could on a concerto. She's a fantastic player. She retired in 2010, and she had trouble moving her hands. She doesn't play. I'm still playing. I'm playing contrabassoon in the Tucson Symphony tonight on Beethoven 5. I'm still playing, and I'm
Look at you.
yeah. And then Marissa just had a baby, right?
Yeah.
So I'm teaching for Marissa at the university. So right now
Nice.
I'm back to work. I'm teaching at the University of Arizona, and I've spent the last 2 months trying to learn how to play contrabassoon again. So it's
Not so retired.
I love contrabassoon. I've owned a contrabassoon since 1981, and I play it about once every 2 years. So about every time, whenever I try to come back, I have to get the fingering chart back out. Try to learn how to play it. It's, I
In
guess
another few years, it'll pay for itself.
maybe yeah. I have a former student who plays contrabassoon in the Atlanta Symphony, Wanda Gomar, and he studied with me in high school and for the first couple of years at Wayne State, and then he went to study with Bernie Garfield at Temple. And after he graduated from Temple, he was waiting tables in Philadelphia, and they had this opening for contrabassoon in the Oregon Symphony. And he called me and said, "Hey, Bob, can I borrow your contra?" And I said, "Sure, Juan, sure." So he came to Detroit and he borrowed my contra, and he took a train from Detroit to Portland, and he won the job. On that contrabassoon. It's a good contra. It's a early Fox. And so he came back, and I got the contra back. And anytime I need any help with the contrabassoon or reads anything, Juan will, if I say, "Hey, Juan, can you send me a read?" He'll send me like 20 reads and stuff like that. He's talking about paying back on a contrabassoon, but he's a fantastic player. You must know Juan. Everybody knows Juan, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a fantastic player. He plays in the Tetons in the summer, and he's just a it's just a fantastic. I love Juan. As anybody that knows Juan loves Juan. So,
So obviously, you've had an incredibly long and successful career, and you are somewhat retired, but now back in the game.
back in the game.
And you have seen the evolution of classical music and orchestral playing across a long period of time. So, of our more experienced guests, I love to ask, like, what changes have you observed, and what are the trends that you are predicting or seeing going forward in the future based on what you've seen in the past?
Yeah, the main thing is that students have gotten so good.
Mhm.
When I took the audition for Detroit, I think there were 35 people that took the audition, and I don't know now. I mean, with all the schools around the country, with all the bassoon players, I mean, there's just fabulous players. I think Ben Kamens could probably his students could probably fill every opening that has been that happens. It seems like Ben has been, I said he was with me at USC. We were both Herzberg students, and Ben has just been a phenomenal teacher at Rice. He gets these kids, and I don't know what he does, but it's kind of magic. It's kind of he's taken. It was like we take. Hertzberg, and then Ben is kind of the bassoon teacher of this generation. I think that everybody wants to go to Rice, and he teaches at the Music Academy in the summer. So it's a great place to be. I hear kids now. They play better than I hear high school kids. I think play better than when I got my first job in Winnipeg. You get a job, and most people think, well, you got a job. You have to keep learning on that job, you keep, trying to get better throughout the years. And I mean, that was true. I kept, always trying to find new ways to do things, better ways to do things, better ways to make reads. And but I just think there's so many jobs out. I mean, there's so few jobs for as many of the great players that are around right now. There's just quite a lot of really good players that are graduating from all over the place, from all different schools. I mean, it's not just Eastman and Juilliard. I mean, I graduated from the University of Arizona, and but my 1 year at USC, I guess, counts. So that helps. And music academy. I went here to the University of Arizona, but every 3 out of the 4 summers that I was here, I went away, and one summer was Aspen, studying with Leonard Sherrow, and then the other 2 summers I was at the Music Academy of the West. So I think I probably learned more about playing the bassoon in the summers than I did at school, because in school, of course, you're doing all your different courses and things like that. In the summer, all you can just practice and do whatever you want to do. You keep playing. So that was, I think, I don't know if I answered your question, but classical, I mean, people have been talking about the demise of classical music, since I was starting in Detroit. I remember seeing John Delancey he gave a lecture at one of the double reed conferences, I think that was in somewhere in Ohio, I remember, and he was talking about how sad it is and how people are going to run out of money. It seems to be hanging on. I think people still love classical music. I had somebody that had gone to a Detroit Symphony concert last week and said that the hall was totally full, and I think they were doing the planets, and if people can market it correctly, there's nothing like hearing an orchestra concert. You can't hear it on a record. You can't, being in the hall is an experience. I mean, I just gave a couple of tickets to a person who's over my house. He makes observatories, and he plays guitar in a rock band, and and he's a Santana improviser, and so I gave him 2 tickets for this concert that we're doing. We're doing Beethoven 5 and the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, and then Leonore Number 3 with the Tucson Symphony. And he's going to be there at the concert Sunday, so it'll be an experience. I got tickets. I saw him play about a month ago, and so he did a Santana. He was up there. He was all dressed up in the hat and the guitar and stuff like that. So he gets to see me with farting away on my contrabassoon. So it'll be fun.
A good trade.
It's a good trade. I think so. Yeah.
So we always ask our guests about reeds, but I have actually been to your garage workshop to
That's
see
right.
the
Yeah.
amazing setup that you have. So can you talk to us about your approach to reeds, your preference on, shape and habits and that type of stuff? But I feel like you folding into that, you also have to walk us through this amazing setup you have in your garage and tell us about how you do what you do.
Okay, so I'm a student of Wendell Jones, Jones double reeds, and that was the Jones profile cane was my go-to cane for probably the first 15 years of my career. And I remember buying a Pfeiffer profiler when I was in Winnipeg, and I'm trying to get that, I got a double profiler, and I was trying to sand the pattern and trying to get it, and it never worked. I finally turned it into a single profiler. But anyway, so that was my kind of inspiration. So I went to there's a machinist in Toronto named Greg James, and I don't know why I did this, but he made a profiler. He made it was based on a redo clarinet profiler for making clarinet reeds, but you could convert it to make bassoon reeds. And I ordered one from him, and I didn't really like it, but he made me a couple of shapers, so I can shape four pieces of cane at once with my shapers because I use like diamond cutters. He made a fairly crude one, and then he made a much fancier one. And so that was probably my first machine that I had. And I had it set up. I think Greg made a Fox 2, a Rigger 1A, and a Hertzberg pattern for both machines. So I can kind of switch the patterns around, even though I basically the cane I sell is a Fox 2 because I think it's the most I mean, with a Fox 2, it's a little wide, so you can narrow it if you want a little bit narrower shape, where a Rigger 1A is a little bit narrower. You can't widen it. So I don't know. I always like the to start a little bit wider. So anyway, so that was the shapers were the first tools that I got. And then um, the Jonathan Parks, who was a English horn player in the Rochester Symphony, made some interesting tools, and he was making some oboe tools. He made an oboe pre-gouger, and I was asking him if he could do that for bassoon. He said, "Yeah." So he made me a pneumatic pre-gouger and also a cane tube cane cutoff tool, which had two saw blades spaced 120 millimeters apart. So it was a cane saw. Basically, you can take your tube cane and find the straightest part and use the. So that was my cane saw, and I had heard about another reed maker named Bob Stevens, who was living in Healdsburg, California, and Bob he grew his own cane in prime winemaking up right on the Russian River. Healdsburg's about 80 miles north of San Francisco. So Treva and I took a trip to visit Bob, and we were staying at a B&B in Healdsburg, and went to his cane shop, and he was showing me all these reeds, and his profiler was this interesting profile that used a diamond encoded wheel that did the profile, went across the cane that did the profiling. And I was really intrigued with that machine because it was so much easier than doing it by hand with by then I was using a Rigger profiler, which, I think is really a bulletproof profiler, but you still have to work quite a lot when you're profiling going back and forth with the Rigger machines or the Pfeiffer machines. So I said, "Hey, Bob, if you ever want to get rid of any of your spare machines or obsolete machines, I would love to I'd love to get some." And he said, "Oh, okay, I'll think about it." About a year and a half later, I got a call from his son saying that Bob decided he wanted to sell me some of his machines. It turned out I think Bob was in the hospital, and I think maybe his son. I don't know what the deal was, but I asked Treva. I said, "Hey, Treva, I want to buy these machines from Bob Stevens. There's a profiler, a shaper, I think a gouger." And she said, "Well, you can't. I'm not going to let you buy anything unless you take Jim Poe." I don't know do you know Jim Poe at all? Jim was a Ford engineer who was a amateur bassoonist. He loved the bassoon, and he has been another one of my really, really good friends for many years. And by the time he retired, he was one down from vice president of the Ford Motor Company, but he was an amateur. And he was teaching reed making at the Glickman Popkin camp for about 10 years before he retired about 3 or 4 years ago. And anyway, so Jim and I jumped in a plane, rented a car in San Francisco, went up to Healdsburg, and we ended up buying, I think it was three different profiling machines and a couple of gougers, and it was a shaper. And it turned out that he needed the shaper back. I had to send the shaper back already, but I already had a shaper that Greg James had made. So anyway, we had all these machines, and we got them back, and then we didn't know what to do with them. I mean, the profilers were weird because one of them just did the back of the reed, another one just did the very tip, and the other one kind of filled it in. And we finally tried to figure it out how to, so I could use just two profiles, so I could profile on two sides of each cane. So it was a four-step process to profile cane, and that was working fairly well. But Jim Pope, this friend of mine is very mechanically minded, and he said, "Well, Bob, if we just get a little bit wider wheel, we can do the whole process on one side, one side at a time with a wider wheel." So, we had gotten these machines from Bob Stevens north of San Francisco, and I called Bob. I said, "Hey, Bob, where did you get these diamond wheels made?" And Bob said, "Well, it's a company called Die Coat, and it's in Novi, Michigan, which is 5 miles from my house in Northville,
Mhm.
Michigan, where I was living." Can you believe? So we went over and they made a new wheel, and Jim modified one of the profilers. So it was we just did one side at a time. And that I was using that process for probably about 5, 6 years. And he had the gougers we had gotten from Bob were very, very crude. They used a laminate trimmer that kind of cut at an angle, and the cane tended to kind of slide when you were trying to gouge it. And there was one piece you had to do one set up one machine as a pre-gouger and the other machine as a final gouger. And so Jim came up with another way to move the cutters down so they were cutting correctly. But then he said, "Well, you know what? I think if we could probably come up with a new design if we could find somebody to do it." Well, I had another friend that was in the auto he made tools for the auto industry to test cars before he would test parts for cars before they actually put them on the cars. His name was Jim Freeze. And he was also an amateur. I don't know if he played, I think he was a trombone player, but his wife was a flute player. And so between Jim Poe and Jim Freeze and another guy named Michael, I can't think of Mike's name, but we had like four people taking the old machines that Bob Stevens had made, and we tried to come up with a new machine that did a lot of things better than Bob's machines. And so he first came up with the profilers. And we had the source of the cutters was right there in this Dyco company, which was north of me. So we came up with the cutters, and then about 2 years later, we came up with a better design for the gougers. So I think we made a total of four profilers and two gougers, and now both Jims are retired, and Jim Freeze is in Florida, and Jim is in a retirement home now in the Detroit area. But the machines are, they're fantastic machines. They work better than anything I've seen. They work. I know they work better than the Jones machines that I used to work on in his office. So in his factory. So we have good machines. So talking about reeds. So the one thing about reeds is, I think the most important thing is to make them the same way. You're always starting from the same place. So what's the term? I can't even think of the term now. It's always you always. I'm starting from the same gouge. I'm doing the same shape. I'm doing the same profile. Consistency. That's a job. So if you're very consistent with the cane, once you cut off your reed, you basically know at that point if the reed is going to work or not. I mean, the other tool that I still use is the Rigger tip profiler, and I'm still using a tip profiler I got from Rigger about 1982. It seems to be a little machine that's kind of bulletproof, and that's the finishing touch on the reeds. So once I cut off my reeds, put them on the tip profiler, sand the outside of the reeds, I can play on the reed, and there's very little I have to do to get the reed to play, which is for oboe players. I know this is mind-boggling. I had
I'm very jealous.
I had the oboe player in the Tucson Symphony over here and showed him my tools, and I said, "Don't you wish you could do that for oboe?" But oboe is such fine, it's such a different animal. Oboe reeds. We tried to do some of this stuff for Triva, and none of it worked. It was just even English horn was, we couldn't get tools to work for English horn, but for bassoon we can get it to work pretty well. I think we can get them to work very well. I'm very proud of the machines that we have. We just have to keep them going and keep them with clean cutters and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
good. Okay. Right.
So I'd love to ask you to share uh, a favorite memory from a past performance. Um, and also, maybe, if you'll humor us, a fun or funny memory of something that has happened in a performance?
Okay, so my when we got a conductor in Detroit, Antil Dorati, who was this old Hungarian conductor who, when he got the job in Detroit, said, I'm not going to take the job unless we do two things. We make record, no, three things. He expanded the size of the orchestra. He wanted to do recordings and he wanted to tour. So we did a 5 week tour in 1979 and it was, it was a European tour. 5 weeks, a 5 week tour is a long tour. But I remember we were playing in Paris and our next stop was Berlin. And we had Yehudi Menuhin was our soloist in Paris, and he was supposed to be our soloist in Berlin, and he got sick. So all of our instruments were shipped over is it the Pyrenees? I don't know, some mountain chain between Paris and Berlin. So they all arrived. We had a dress rehearsal before the concert, and the trucks got stuck in a snowstorm, and they all arrived late. So like my bassoon was like frozen. I got it on stage, and we were trying to warm up on Beethoven 7, and my bassoon was playing like a quarter step flat until it warmed up. But this is a dress rehearsal, so it wasn't a big deal. So then that night so because Menuhin was sick, I think we ended up putting in. I think we did the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, the Beethoven Seventh Symphony, and something else on the program. At the end of the program, this was in the Berlin Concert House, which was mind-boggling for us from Detroit. This is this beautiful new hall that they built, and the audience would not stop clapping. So we're playing, and Dorati, I think, we did I'm sure we did a couple of encores. And Dorati keeps coming on and off. He probably came on and off about 7 times. He finally just let the strings go. And the wind players are sitting there. You could finally, okay, we can put our horns. They're still applauding. It was just mind-boggling. Okay, so that was that was our introduction to what European audiences can really, because we'd never seen anything like that in Detroit.
Right.
Okay, so then you want to hear one of my most embarrassing things. So we had this fantastic conductor. He's still conducting, Herbert Blumstedt. And I think he's like 98, 99. He's still conducting. But for a couple of years, he conducted us quite a lot in Detroit. And he took us on a tour, I mean, around Detroit. I mean, in Michigan, we were doing a concert at, it was a university, a little university. I think it was Alma College or something like that in outside of, no, Albion. Was it Albion College? Anyway, we were playing there and we were doing Brahms' Third Symphony, and we were using these old parts in the orchestra, and it was Brahms' Third Symphony. It's this beautiful symphony. The slow movement is it's one of the most beautiful things written in the literature. And I do a page turn. All of a sudden I'm turning, we're starting the slow movement. And I'm on the third movement. I think the slow movement's the second. And I go back and it's like I thought somebody had ripped out my part. So I'm sitting there. What the hell am I going to do? So I'm sitting there trying to fake my way all the way through the slow movement of the Brahms, and I played it enough that I think I managed to get most of the notes. And then I realized that the paper was just stuck together. But I mean that was the most. I mean, you're sitting there, all of a sudden, we'd gone through the first movement. Everything was fine. It's this beautiful symphony. We have this great conductor. The audience is a bunch of young kids. They love it, and and I had played it enough that I was able to fake my way through most of it, but not all of it. I went and I apologized. I said, I thought somebody had taken the part out. I mean, that was, and I loved Blumstedt. I mean, I hoped he was going to be our music director, but but he's still conducting. He's this wonderful conductor. So that was so if you ever are in that situation, use your fingers. It was, we're most librarians now, they're all using new parts. It's really good. But we were using the same parts that the orchestra had probably been using for 80 years, Brahms symphony. And it was just, and it was
You
it was
just
great. We
assumed
had
it
all
had
of
disintegrated.
it was in the process of disintegrating, but yeah, I turned the page and the two pages had locked together, and it was I mean,
Amazing.
but yeah, I probably screwed up a few solos, but I don't even want to think about that. But I remember we one of the last things that I recorded the Five Sacred Trees of John Williams with the Detroit Symphony because Leonard Slacken wanted to record most, if not all, of John Williams' concertos. So I remember, practicing that piece. I never learned it earlier. So, I knew in the summer that I was going to be recording it. I think we were recording it in November or something like that. And so I did a recital here in Tucson because we were spending our summers in Tucson. And I managed to do a recital at a church here in Tucson. And I played the Five Sacred Trees and I played it. I rehearsed it a lot with the accompanist, and I was writing all these cues in the fourth movement. So we get to the fourth movement on the first day with Slack and conducting, and I've got all the cues written in my part from the piano, and they're not, the piano cues have nothing to do with the orchestra parts. And I'm sitting there, and oh my God. So I went to Leonard. I said, okay, Leonard, you got to do me a favor. You got to give a big downbeat on this movement for every downbeat. And he did. God bless him. And we got through that piece. So. And the recording turned out pretty well. I mean, it's available. I think you can download it if you ever heard it. But that was that was kind of an embarrassing moment just because I had thought I had gotten, but I hadn't. I wasn't quite as prepared as I should have been.
So before we get to our last question, is there anything you were hoping to be able to talk about that we didn't get to that you would like to cover?
I have always loved the bassoon. I think bassoon players love the instrument. I have a very good friend, Peggy Dudley. You know Peggy, right? Yeah. So Peggy and I played in the National Repertoire Orchestra in 1972 when it was in Evergreen, Colorado. So I've known Peggy. She's from Detroit, and she spent her career in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany, and I, of course, spent most of my career in Detroit. And she retired here in Tucson. So when I got here, I retired in 2020, and after COVID, she basically said, "Okay, Bob, we're going to play duets every Wednesday from 2 to 4, so we can still pretend like we still can play the instrument." So we've expanded that. We started off with duets, and then we started trios, and now it's quartets and sometimes even quintets. But all bassoon players love to get along. One of I have a very my dear friend John Miller. I started playing quartets with him right when I met him when I subbed in the Minnesota Orchestra just before I went to Detroit. And he said, "Well, hey, Bob, I play these quartets around Labor Day in Boston. Are you interested in coming?" "Oh, yeah, I'd love to." So, we were in the neo-bubonic, no, the Buddhist bassoon quartet and the Buddhist bassoon trio. And then we became the neo-bubonic quartet with Per Hannevold and Norbert Nielabowski. And, but I don't know, I always have loved the instrument. I don't see that in oboe players. I'm sorry, Gaelic, but I think I don't know, maybe.
We're all too traumatized, Bob.
I don't know. I don't. But I love the bassoon, and I don't. It's done great things for me. It's gotten me out of a couple of binds in my life too. So it's a. I don't know what to say. I don't know what it is about blowing into that instrument that sometimes I've had my places where I'm, shaking in my boots and things like that before the conductor drops a baton on the right of spring or something like that, or the Chike Six. But I think most of us love the instrument. So I I didn't say that before, did I?
No, but it leads perfectly into our last question that we always ask, which is, what advice do you have for a young musician listening who aspires to have a career like yours?
Just try to do as much as you possibly possibly can. I mean, I was so lucky. I mean, the thing with a faculty quintet that I was playing an orchestra. Like I said, my wife who went to Eastman that didn't even play in an orchestra till her junior year at Eastman. Can you believe that? In her conservatory, we're here, and I'm in this little town, Tucson. I mean, it's the university is a nice university, but it's not a conservatory. It's not. But I got a chance to play a lot. I was playing in the youth orchestras. I took lessons from the best people I could possibly take lessons from. Leonard Sharrow after my freshman year. The interesting thing at Aspen is you got to run across all these people you would be taking auditions with in a few years. So that was kind of a fun situation, interesting situation. And bassoon, I run across bassoonists that I've met. I still see them, and I love talking bassoon. I love helping people out. I don't do too much teaching, which is too bad. I'm teaching at the university right now, and I really love it, because I feel like I've got a lot to give. And when you're retired, you're sitting around here and I don't know. So just try to do as much playing, and there's much stuff out there now on the internet, so much information that was not there. When Jerry Corey came out with this little thing called To the World's Bassoonist, I think he came out with that just about the same time I started in Winnipeg, probably around 1970 or 71. And all of a sudden, you could find little tricks about how to play, hey, there's a new fingering for the instrument and stuff like that. But there's so much information out on the internet now that it's a little bit mind-boggling. So just go out and learn and hopefully have fun. That's the other thing, is try to enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, do something else.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Bob, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Double Redish. We had a great time.
Well, I had a great time too. I hope it was helpful. So
Amazing.
I see you were both smiling, so that's good.
How could we not?
Okay, we hope you enjoyed that wonderful final bassoon episode with Bob Williams. What a delightful way to end the bassoon portion of our series. If you don't want to miss out on when we're going to release this last episode ever, don't forget to subscribe, follow us on social media. You can rate and review, or you cannot. And
We don't care.
we don't care. We're moving on. Glee will be our last guest ever.
We had the pleasure of speaking with Krista Garvey, professor of oboe at the University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. And if this is going to be your last episode with us and you don't want to hear the sappy sap at the actual last episode, thank you for joining us for the last 8 years.
Yes, thank you.
We appreciate you. And Jackie, it's time to end this nerd parade.
It's almost time to end this nerd parade. We're good. Go make reads.